G7 leaders this morning waiting for President Trump. He's torn up their assumptions and regularly done the same with their agendas. Italy's Prime Minister wanted to know if he was definitely turning up at all.
Thank you very much for your questions. We're optimistic he will come. He will come. He said he will come. So it's 45.
He hadn't gone home early as he did at two previous G7s, but his war on Iran has stolen focus, hurt global growth, and wasn't supported by any of the other leaders in the room. Germany's Chancellor amongst those turning the cheek on insults that have been sprayed in their direction since the attacks on Iran began, a gift of a Germany World Cup shirt.
We've had a great meeting, we have a great relationship.
Qatar's leader amongst those dropping in on this G7 heard President Trump's latest rewrite of his war aims.
I never cared about regime change, it's never a part, but I guess you have regime change because you know better than anybody. The first group, they're all dead. The second group, they're dead. A part of the third group is gone. And we're dealing with people that I think are very rational people. I mean, they were nice to deal with.
We welcome the deal that President Trump has been able to get in this situation and congratulate him and the mediators on the work that they have done, because this is a really important breakthrough.
So first, do you have bilaterals being organized?
It emerged President Zelenskyy had secured two one-on-one chats with President Trump. The Ukrainian president had just tweeted out images of a drone attack on an oil refinery in the Moscow area. President Trump promised to reimpose suspended oil sanctions on Russia soon. There was no repeat of past clashes with the Ukrainian leader, but fully engaging President Trump in the conflict other G7 leaders want prioritised is still a mighty challenge.
We're going to have a special focus on Ukraine.
Well, we're going to look. Now we were focused on Iran. That's going to be in the back, in the rear view mirror. But look, we have nothing to do with it. We sell weapons to them. It has no impact on us other than we sell weapons. We're thousands of miles away.
Ever since he helicoptered in from Geneva airport to this summit, Keir Starmer has been dogged by the looming prospect of a leadership challenge at home he might not be able to withstand. Even as he gave interviews in Evian, Wes Streeting was holding a press event in London, sounding like a candidate for a leadership contest that had already begun.
You won't find me making pledges to win your vote in a leadership election, only to let you down after the ballots are counted.
From that, so I will fight if there's a challenge. I don't think there should be a challenge. At the very time we're here at the G7.
Just as the Prime Minister offered up naval support for mine clearing in the Strait of Hormuz, his Defence Secretary was telling the Commons Keir Starmer's proposed defence budget would mean cuts. And the head of the military told a House of Lords committee much the same.
I see the current defence investment plans falling well short of what is required.
We will have to dial back our activities and our exercise and operational activity if the level of resource funding that is available to us does not increase.
Keir Starmer insisted the defence budget was set, and the new Defence Secretary, appointed on Friday, would have to make do and shift money within his budget if he had different priorities. Defending himself made him late for the next session of talks.
Very many times on my political journey, people have said to me, it's not possible. They said it's not possible to turn the Labour Party around, it's not possible to win an election, it's not possible if you do win an election to invest in your public services and stabilise the economy. Wrong every time, and that's why I intend not to walk away from this.
British team, but do you know with Kiev, we wait for him? Are you sure? Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, could you have a look to these guys?
The G7 host France will be feeling they've got through the bulk of today's business without incident. After past G7s with President Trump in attendance, that'll count as a win, but no triumph. Well, the G7 leaders, minus Donald Trump, will be hoping that they've got Donald Trump into a better place on Ukraine. They certainly haven't heard so much pro-Putin stuff as maybe they feel they've heard in the past from him, but they'll all be conscious that this is a man whose attention span can be short and fleeting and could flip to a completely different argument, as you heard in that report there, having said one thing, suddenly saying the other. As for Keir Starmer, he's had to endure today listening to three defence figures, two ministers who resigned last week and the current chief of the defence staff, pretty much saying that the defence budget is not enough. And Keir Starmer, more clearly I think than we've heard him say since John Healey resigned, seemed to be saying, well, you've got to find, if you want any extra things, you've got to lose some things within the defence budget. And that raises the possibility of potentially, if Keir Starmer's still there and that's the policy, maybe even reviewing losing a significant capability. And that raises the possibility, a lot of defence people would tell you, of another resignation or two not far down the line. As we saw, political manoeuvres continuing at home. Keir Starmer returns home tomorrow night to try and stop a political cage fight on his own lawn.
Thanks, Gary. Well, as you've just heard, Wes Streeting has been setting out his economic stall to beat Labour leader, claiming he has enough support from Labour MPs to be able to run for Prime Minister himself. I spoke to Wes Streeting earlier and started by asking him what Britain should say now in response to that Russian frigate firing shots at a yacht in the Channel.
Well, this is obviously a fast-moving situation, and I think before we jump into speculation and commentary, I think just to take a step back and see the bigger picture, we can see that Russia is a threat to this country on a whole number of levels, from the excellent operation mounted by Special Forces just the other day, what we now know to be a Russian-backed attack on the personal home of the Prime Minister, which has now been through the courts, and now this situation. These are some of the seen threats from Russia. There are also a wide range of unseen threats as well. And we should be no doubt about the threat that Russia poses to this country. And that's why, in terms of how Britain responds, not just now in this moment, but in relation to defence investment, preparedness, resilience, and future-proofing against the conflicts that we may see in the future, the threats we may see in the future, we've got to get the defence investment plan right. We've got to make sure it's funded, and we've got to make sure that when it comes to modernising the way that the Ministry of Defence and the Armed Forces work, that investment is also matched with modernisation.
But on this incident, do you now want to see the Navy patrolling the Channel?
I think if I was sat in the Cobra room receiving briefing, I'd want to act on the advice, and I'm certainly not going to turn into an armchair spectator or armchair general. This is a fast-moving situation. So I think it's important that the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary lead the response, and I think it's really important that people like me support those efforts.
Would you say we are in a hybrid war now with Russia?
Well, I've always viewed the war in Ukraine as the front line for freedom and democracy in Europe. But we've seen that whether it's the poisoning of the Skripals in Salisbury, whether it is the arson attack on the Prime Minister's personal home, whether it is this incident in the Channel, Russia does pose a direct threat to this country. And Russia has stepped up its aggression and state-backed activity against Britain because of the way in which we have stood up to Russian aggression, Russian bullying, Russian intimidation. And it doesn't need to be like this. Our quarrel isn't with the people of Russia, and we can only look back to, I suppose, what in the grand scheme of things is relatively recent history of the Second World War, when we stood together and we spilled blood together and we saw off the Nazis together. So our quarrel isn't with the Russian people, but there should be no doubt about what President Putin and the Russian state pose to us, which is a really serious threat. And that's why, when it comes to making sure that we can defend ourselves, defend our allies, and guard against future threats, not just current threats, we've got to grip this issue with the Defence Investment Plan, make sure it's the right... So look, first and foremost, I think making sure we've got the right plan. It does concern me that whether it's Al Khans, who's just resigned as the Armed Forces Minister and is himself a highly decorated veteran, whether it is some of our current and former senior military leaders, I think it's not clear that we've got the right plan first and foremost. The plan, when it is published, needs to be one that is prepared to see off future threats, not simply fighting the last war. And I'm not clear from those who have seen the Defence Investment Plan, bearing in mind it hasn't been published yet, that the plan itself is in the right place. So the first thing you've got to do in short order is make sure you've got the right plan, then make sure it's adequately funded, and make sure that the Ministry of Defence and our armed services modernised. Because what I do see as a former health secretary are lots of parallels between the way that people describe the Ministry of Defence, bad on procurement, not very good on productivity, lots of vested interests, lots of inter-service rivalries. I mean, you could strip out the military terminology and you're basically describing what I walked into in the Department of Health and Social Care with the NHS. And the lesson I learned there as the health secretary is, yes, you need investment, but you've also got to modernise. You've got to make sure the money's well spent. So I think it's time to end the tyranny of low expectations when it comes to the Ministry of Defence and make sure that in return for the investment, they also deliver the modernisation and reform that's necessary.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Al Khan's, but not the Defence Secretary who resigned first, John Healey. And he's resigned because he doesn't think the money is there.
Well, that brings me to the point about money.
Yes, so if you're Prime Minister, how are you going to deliver nearer 3% and getting to 3.5% sooner rather than later?
So firstly, I think John Healey was an excellent Defence Secretary, and I thought his speech in the House of Commons today was excellent and absolutely right about needing to set that clear path to our NATO obligations and to make sure that we're making the right choices across government. You know, when I hear that my colleagues in the Cabinet are being asked to find a kind of standard 1% saving across their budgets, that doesn't tell me that the Prime Minister is prioritising, that tells me that he isn't prioritising. And with great respect, and especially as a former health secretary, I think walking and cycling are great things. But to announce a £4.5 billion walking and cycling fund the day after your Defence Secretary resigns because there isn't enough money to keep our country safe, that leaves me questioning not just the terrible optics of that, but whether we're making the right judgments on priorities.
So there will need to be deeper cuts to some departments?
I think it's a few things, to be honest, Christian. I've put out a plan for a wealth tax that works, which would equalise capital gains between income tax and capital gains tax, as well as providing generous entrepreneurs relief.
You believe that would
that would raise up to £12 billion. There are savings to be found across government. We can't just ladder all of this onto tax. We are spending more as a government, so there's no return to austerity here. But you do need to make choices. To govern is to choose. And I think that, going back to your very first question, when you look not just at potential threats from Russia, when you look at materialising threats from Russia, I don't want this country in years down the line to curse us because we didn't act against the threats that our intelligence estimates tell us are real and the Prime Minister himself has told us are real.
Yeah, but you've been in government, so what would you be cutting? I mean, you're going to have to make choices, as you say.
Yeah, so that's right. So as I say, I've set out already in the early stages of the leadership debate about the future leadership of the Labour Party, how I'd raise money through a wealth tax that works. I've been very clear that I'd be willing to look across government budgets and go deep into the detail to try and pull out savings in other areas wherever possible.
You're criticising Keir Starmer for going for small cuts across the board,
No, just standard cuts, because you're not telling me, for example, in the debate about choices and trade-offs, would I be cutting the NHS to fund defence? No, I would not be doing that.
Would you cut welfare?
Are there other things that are more important? Well, on welfare, I think the course that Pat McFadden has set out is the right one. The best way to cut the welfare budget is to get 1 million young people who are out of work into work. That's the best way to cut the welfare bill.
It's not going to cut it next year or the year after.
No, and also you've got to be, I think, with the welfare budget, and we've seen this before with the welfare debate, when you just try and put in place an arbitrary cut and then retrofit some reform on the back of it, it doesn't work. And it risks, I mean, what I saw Labour MPs doing during the course of the welfare debate that the government botched was and these are people who are up for welfare reform, literally looking through the numbers and saying, okay, I've got 2,000 losers in my constituency, but there are only 200 vacancies. So where are my constituents going to find the jobs? And that's why on welfare, of course it's politically attractive to say, let's cut the welfare budget now to fund national security, but we're also talking about people's lives. And you've got to get it right. And I think that, in terms of the
so
welfare
you won't cut the
reform
NHS,
agenda,
you won't cut welfare in
no,
the
I didn't
short
say, I
term.
didn't say, yeah, well, look, you've got to be serious about
but I mean, if
how
you're
to cut
saying
the welfare budget.
you want to increase the defence budget in the short term, how are you going to do it?
Well, as I say, Christian, when you're in government, you've got access to the books, you've got access to advice across every government department. Don't treat every government department and every area of government spending as if all priorities are equal. I mean, this is part of the challenge for the Prime Minister.
So something will have to take pain.
Yeah, of course.
You just don't know what it is yet.
I don't think that Cabinet colleagues are pushing back against that. But what I'm not seeing is a serious effort to find savings or a serious way to find additional tax revenues. Because as I say, the wealth tax reforms that I'm putting out, they would generate up to £12 billion worth of receipts. There are no doubt other areas where you can find savings too. And it'll be a combination of those things. And then finally, look, the speech I've given today about the future of the economy is how we can get Britain growing again and growing together. Because if your economy is growing, all of these other choices become so much more easy. You can invest in your public services without hiking up taxes. You can put money back in people's pockets because you've got the proceeds of growth. So that's the agenda that I've spelt out today, with a whole number of things that I would do differently to go harder for growth.
I mean, when you say you would intervene to deliver infrastructure more quickly, that's pretty much what Keir Starmer said as well. So what did he do wrong that you would get right?
Well, look, let me give you a few examples. So on infrastructure and on housing development, there's been legislation going through Parliament, yet for the last 2 years we've been in government, the number of kids living in temporary accommodation has gone up by 11%. That's more kids living in bed and breakfasts and hostels at a cost of £3 billion to the taxpayer because we're not building the homes we need quickly enough. Now, in addition to the planning reform that we've put out, I think there are a couple of practical things that we can do, in fact, using laws that already exist. The first is intervene where councils are not building homes fast enough against their targets. If every council in the country was building at the same rate as Milton Keynes, we'd be smashing our housing targets. They're not. So as much as I'm in favour of devolution, if councils aren't fulfilling their obligations to build the homes we need, take back control, pull them in and make those decisions centrally to get Britain building again. The second thing is the way in which we currently construct the whole process for development creates additional bureaucracy, uncertainty for developers, and also leaves local communities often opposing the homes that they know they need, not because they don't want more homes, but because they want the infrastructure that goes with it. Where are the GP surgeries? Will we have the bus routes? Will we have the good quality roads? Those are the sorts of practical questions people have. The law is already on the statute books to auction land with planning permission attached and to then levy a tax on the proportion of the value of that land sale. Now that's better for developers because they know what they're getting. There's a lot less bureaucracy for them. Better for local councils because we can use the tax receipts to build the community infrastructure,
if it's
the
that
GPs,
straightforward,
and all
why
the rest
hasn't
of
it been done?
I don't know. I mean,
is it just incompetence?
You have to ask government ministers and ask the Prime Minister. But I don't think, to be honest, that we've got a focus, a boldness, and a clarity of vision and direction to really get the government motoring forward. And often, and I think we've seen this actually with this defence investment plan process. So broadly, we know what the plan needs to be. The government's got to make sure they get it right. But when you know what the price tag is, you've got choices to make. And the longer you dither and delay and you don't make those decisions, the costs often go up, the consequences become more severe, and ultimately you end up arriving later at decisions that could have been taken earlier. I experienced a little bit of this when I was the Health Secretary, but my approach when I was leading my government department and leading the NHS was to make decisions as quickly as possible, to make sure you give clarity of direction so that people know where you're going, and then to focus relentlessly on delivery. And that's why, for example, not only were we bringing waiting lists down, we were bringing waiting lists down a level we hadn't seen for 17 years, and we were doing that in spite of strikes and at the same time as matching the investment with modernisation. So productivity growth in the NHS was 2.7%. People's eyes might glaze over at this point and think, oh God, productivity growth. What does that mean in practice? It means the money that is going in stretches further, so you can treat more patients more quickly. That's why investment and reform matters. It's why you've got to have clarity of direction and also grip at the centre. And I think that too often the priorities of this government haven't been clear enough, or when confronted with vested interests, especially on growth, we say we're pro-growth, we say it's the number one priority, but then we don't make the pro-growth choice. Immigration's another example, for example, where you've got absolutely the right thing to do, control the borders, deal with the boats, close asylum hotels. The Home Secretary is doing a lot of that. But the risk is, in the immigration debate, that when it comes to attracting global talent, the entrepreneurs, the creative industry leaders, the scientists, the inventors, that could really get Britain motoring in the jobs and the industries of the future, our rhetoric risks cutting off our nose to spite our face. So I would go for 20,000 more talent visas over the course of this Parliament, and actively go after the best brains around the world to get them here to Britain, not least from America, where we've got a pretty anti-science agenda coming out of the Trump administration.
What did you mean by the bond markets are not Bond villains? That's a pop at Andy Burnham, isn't it?
No, actually, it was a pop at the Green Party and Zach Polanski. And look, when your debt is running at almost 100% of GDP, the bond markets really matter. Because if they don't have confidence in your plans, borrowing cost goes up. And when they do, that means that you're spending billions of pounds servicing debt when you could be investing billions of pounds in public services. And there is a recklessness with the Green Party's approach, which I think some people on the broader left find tempting, of saying, stuff the bond markets, they don't matter, we're the democratically elected government. And look, I just say to Zach Polanski and the Greens, you can't print money, you can't borrow your way out of crisis. But I'd also say to some people on my own side, that doesn't mean the choice is helplessness. You don't need to go for the stability of the graveyard either. You can have a growth plan that markets have confidence in. Fiscal rules matter. They've got to understand not just the bond markets, but business investors more broadly. They've got to want to, they'll want to know that they are investing in a country that's got a clear plan, clear direction, and will say what it means and means what it says. And that's why fiscal rules matter. It's not that, I think sometimes with things like fiscal rules, it's almost like they're a constraint on progressive ambition. No, they're not. They're the means through which we deliver it. Because if the markets have confidence in your government, if they've got confidence in your plan for growth, they'll back it and they'll invest in it, and your borrowing costs come down, and therefore you've got more to invest in your public services. So that's why I say bond markets are not bond villains. And look, let's be honest, there is obviously a risk, and people talk about it, so let's just address it. There is a risk that a Labour leadership contest becomes a Dutch auction of the most expensive, most popular pledges that appeal to the party faithful, but do not serve the national interest as a result. And I'm not going to play that game, as I've put on every single leaflet in Ilford North at every general election. You may not always agree with me, but you'll always know where I stand. And today I set out a plan for fairness and for growth, because ultimately, what do I think the big problem in this country is? And there's plenty to choose from, but what do I think the biggest problem in this country is that for the first time in our modern history, the next generation are set to do worse than the last. And we see deepening, widening inequality in our country. And when people feel like they work hard, they play by the rules, but others don't, or they work hard and the country might be growing, but their lives aren't, that's where you get resentment. And resentment is never politically homeless for long. And that's what Farage is playing into. He's playing into that resentment, and he's saying to people, if you shut the borders, if you cut yourself off from the world, if you scapegoat foreigners, then you'll be better off. And that might be attractive to some people, but it is a dangerous place for our country to be. And I genuinely think that, firstly, only Labour is capable of beating reform at the next general election, and that is a fight we're currently losing. But secondly, the Labour Party, throughout our history, we have been a force for change and progressive goals. And in the aftermath of the Second World War, when the country was arguably in a far worse state than it is today, we built our defence, we built the nuclear deterrent, and we built NATO, but we also built the NHS. We also built the homes that the country needed. So we did it before, we still can.
And that's your tagline for the campaign, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
just finally, I mean, you've been very clear you think Starmer should quit if Andy Burnham wins on Friday. A lot of people are still assuming you're going to do a deal. You know, that he's way ahead. It's not going to make sense for Labour MPs to say we'll back Wes Streeting and you know rule out joining a Burnham government as a result. If he offers you the cabinet job that you'd like, are you going to say let's not have a contest after all?
Look, first and foremost, and at the expense of you having to list all the candidates in a by-election, let me first of all say the vote's on Thursday, and Andy, we, the Labour Party, we're not taking the votes for granted. And I was there in Makerfield on Monday. We've got to make sure that all those undecided voters realise how close it is between Labour and Reform. We need Andy back in Parliament. I'm absolutely unequivocal about that. And on many levels, I think Andy Burnham is a brilliant politician. I think he's had a great record as Mayor of Greater Manchester, and he was my immediate predecessor as the Labour Health Secretary. I like and respect him very much. And I can understand why some people in the party would say, spare us a contest, can you work together? And of course we'll end up working together. But I do think, though, that with a contest, people and ideas are tested and you emerge stronger from it. And I think there are risks with just saying, oh, well, let's just all get together now and there won't be a leadership election. And I do think that is a risk, because I think with respect to Andy, he's not set out his full platform yet. I've not set out my full platform yet. There may well be others who want to set out their platform. I think we'll be better for a battle of ideas. And I think it has to be ideas, by the way, not just personalities, and certainly not petty factional politics. And of course, there's more that unites us in the Labour Party that divides us, absolutely no doubt about that. And if I emerged on top, I hope that Andy would join my team. If Andy emerged as the winner, I'd proudly join his team. But I think we really do need a battle of ideas about not just Labour's future, but Britain's future. There are big challenges. I'm optimistic we can meet them. And as you say, you know, the strapline for my campaign is we still can, partly because I want to reignite in this country a sense of hope and possibility, that we still can do big things, that the things that people aspire to for their kids, for their grandchildren, like the best start in life, that when you work hard and play by the rules, you can afford a home of your own and have a decent quality of life, that when you retire, you don't just look back on a life well lived, you live life to the full until the very end. Like, those aren't radical goals, but for too many people in our country, they feel out of reach at the moment. And I think we've got to give this country a bit of hope and self-confidence back, that those aims that people have for their own lives, for their families, those are the aspirations we all have. People deserve to have that quality of life, and we still can.
Wes Streeting, thank you very much.
Thank you.